Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly with the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled eXtremOS, Modeling the European Energy System of the Future under Extreme Technological, Regulatory, and Societal Developments. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Michael Bucksteeg, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues amongst professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We have allocated time at the end of the webinar to read and answer them. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Michael Bucksteeg, member of the board and CFO of the German affiliate of IAEE. We are also grateful to GEE and FFE for co-sponsoring this webinar with IAEE today. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and welcome also from my side. Today I'm representing the German affiliate of the IAEE, the GEE. Actually, our association provides an interdisciplinary platform for young researchers, people from the industry and senior experts. And every year we offer student chapters, different workshops, and support young researchers with different awards. Maybe some of you remember the recent webinar on nuclear energy and policy. And yeah, we moreover established a close cooperation with the FFE in Munich over the past years. We held several student chapters and expert workshops in the nice city of Munich. And today the colleagues from the FFA will present results from a research project focusing on deep decarbonization. And Annika and I will guide you through today's webinar. And I'm now happy to hand over to Annika to further introduce the presenters of today's webinar.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for your introduction. We will share now our presentation. Here we go. I'm Annika. I'm an employee at FFE, and you can see that we're quite many speakers. I will not introduce each of us, but you will get to know us in the course of the presentation, I'm sure. But let's have a look maybe at FFE so you know where we come from. The FFA, Timo, maybe you can show the next slide, is a research and consultant institute in Munich, and we see ourselves as enablers of sustainable energy system. So we are, of course, our focus is on science, but we also work with companies together. So we bring together these fields of science and practice, and we work on all the different topics in the energy environment. So we look into energy systems, energy markets, but also into specific fields such as energy efficiency, broadening the scope to resource and climate protection, and looking into all these topics which you can imagine. And yeah, our methods are, of course, data analysis, modeling, which we will talk a lot about today, but also going into practice, looking at field tests, going into companies and doing energy management. So the whole spectrum, which you can imagine. But today, let's go to the next slide and see what is the content which we are going to talk today. Today, it is about the European energy system analysis. We would like to give you an introduction into this field. So we will show first some results of our project eXtremOS, which was finished last year. And we will show results, but also, of course, for you, it might be interesting to know a bit more on the databases and the modeling behind these results. And then these methods, which we develop in the course of the eXtremOS projects, will be further expanded in other projects which are currently running. For example, the project TransHyDE-Sys, which is focusing now on more having a deeper look into infrastructure and hydrogen. So this, what we see today, will be the basis for further going down into the modeling and in the infrastructure topic. So we are also glad to get some discussion points, questions from your side to include your feedback in the coming work at FFE. Well, but I think enough of introduction now. I think we would like to know why actually European energy system analysis is interesting. So I think I will hand over to Andrej, who can give us some insights.
Yes, thank you, Annika. I will introduce the framing and general setting of our project within the next couple of slides. And as you already heard, we're about to speak in this webinar about European energy system analysis. And we're using our project, our research project, eXtremOS, as an example to do this. But every now and then during the presentation, we also have a few different results from other projects that we will face in where we think it adds to the topic. So the project eXtremOS was a 3-year research project started in 2018 and finished last year. And we performed it with several industry partners, as well as our 3 research partners, which were the Technical University Munich, the Karlsruhe Technical University, and so Karlsruhe Institute for Technology, and the Agora Energiewende, which is a think tank, or basically the most well-known think tank for energy in Germany. And what we asked ourselves when we started eXtremOS, and this is also the core motivation behind the project, was what actually happens to Germany, to the German energy system, and to the energy system of Germany's neighbors if all countries in Europe strive towards deep emission reduction. And I pronounce all countries because back then and up until very recently, basically, I would say summer last year, most of the German energy system scenarios, which analyze target-based scenarios, meaning pathways, how Germany can achieve its climate targets, basically took a very constrained perspective by mainly focusing on Germany, and perhaps only including Europe as a sort of reference development around Germany. But as you all know and are aware of, to achieve climate targets globally and in Europe, this means that also our neighboring countries have to undergo this transformation. And we wanted to explicitly tackle this issue and develop a tool chain and a project which allows us to both analyze Europe as a whole and the transformation pathway in Europe on a European level, but also dig deeper into each country's transformation pathway. And as you can see already here in this schematic representation of Europe, break down results from eXtremOS even smaller into smaller regions on a district level. So this was the general thought and idea behind eXtremOS. And adding to that, because it's a research project, we had a strong aim for which was focused on extending and broadening our model landscape at FFE, improving our models to grasp the European scope, but also go deeper into individual sectors and individual technologies. And then ultimately, also with one of the goals, as it's the research project, we wanted to learn about the European energy system. We wanted to learn about the European energy market and perform analysis with our tools that also broaden and depthen our horizon with respect to the energy transition in Europe. So this was basically the initial thought behind eXtremOS. And then just to briefly sketch out the core components of the project, we had a phase in the project where we looked at scenario analysis in detail and developed scenarios for deep emission reduction in Europe. We had a modeling component and data package in eXtremOS, which took up most of the time during the project. And then we obviously also had a results dissemination component in eXtremOS, where we focused on how we can package our results and transfer the knowledge that we gained throughout the project to a broader set of stakeholders, including the scientific community, but also industry players and perhaps policymakers as well. So let's begin with step one. What are we going to show you today in terms also of the results in the European energy system? We, in our scenario process, developed a European deep emission reduction pathway called SolidEU. And the name SolidEU is basically a word synthesis resulting from solidarity plus EU. And the solidarity aspects basically describes the socio-political background behind the scenario we are about to show, because the background is that Europe unites behind, let's say, the science and tackles the climate challenge hand in hand and tackles it jointly. And now you might wonder how I know this and whether we only made up the story basically to fit our data, but this was not the case. We had two work streams in the scenario process, a qualitative and a quantitative work stream, which we intertwined closely in a so-called integrated scenario process. So this means our research partners from KIT ITAS, they focused on developing storylines towards a deep emission reduction scenario in Europe. We focused on providing the parameters and quantification of parameters for these scenarios, and we interlinked these processes through several workshops in order to achieve consistency between the storyline and the quantitative process. So the SolidEU scenario and most of the results today will focus on this scenario from eXtremOS. Is a integrated scenario, and there's a lot of information also on the website with respect to the storyline and the details of socio-political descriptors which describe the scenario more in a more detailed way. Now, as to the main point basically of the scenario, we want to provide here an overview which targets are actually achieved in our SolidEU scenario. And we can say that in SolidEU, the 2-degree target is met, and we roughly get around 1.8 degrees with our scenario here. I know the question will come probably later, so I will try to answer it preventively and say that when we decided which scenario to calculate early on during the eXtremOS process, climate neutrality was not the common goal, let's say, in all of the discussion and regulatory framework in Europe and the individual countries. Now, today we would upgrade the scenario obviously to a climate neutrality pathway. Nevertheless, the core components of the scenario will be relatively consistent. Only towards the end, obviously, climate neutrality will require an intensification of efforts with respect to the measures in the end. But we'll speak about this later. Now, this is the background behind the scenario, and we will also dive into the modeling details throughout our talk today, but this is the initial overview. This is our model landscape that we use to model this climate protection scenario in Europe. And it consists basically of sector models, which model in detail the final energy consumption in the industry, transport, household, and services sector. It includes renewable energy models, which analyze the potential for each renewable energy source in Europe, as well as the costs. And basically, these two components feed into the energy system model ESA, which is our unit dispatch and expansion model, which optimizes the unit dispatch and expansion and provides input to the gas infrastructure and gas market model MINGA, which is also part of the tool chain here. What is, I would say, unique about the FFE toolchain and the models we used here is that we achieve a very high regional and timely temporal resolution with these models, which enables us to achieve the goal that we set out to achieve, basically analyze Europe and the EU 27 plus 3 countries in Europe, but also be able to break down the European transformation pathway into regions in order to show what the challenge that we are facing means for the individual stakeholders in each region. And these few slides were here were used now to introduce eXtremOS, and I think that's our first point where we can take some questions. If there are
thank
any.
you, Andrej. I'm just checking the Q&A section. There are no questions yet. Maybe to remind the audience, please feel free to ask questions, especially now that we go deeper into the results and the data and the models. I'm sure they will pop something up. Just and we will make some breaks in between so we can collect your questions and hope to answer them then after each section. So just don't wait until the end, but really ask your questions whenever they pop up. I think for now we got a good start on why the European energy system analysis is important and what are the main parts to consider. We have the scenario process, we have data, we have model, but maybe to start and get a better idea, Andrej, could you maybe start maybe with the results? I think that would be interesting. So what actually came out when you did all this work? What are the key results? Maybe you could give us a bit more insight on this.
Okay, let's do this. Let's try to, in this section, we'll try to do exactly what I just said or proposed before, that we'll take a look at Europe and then for one exemplary region, for Bavaria, we'll break down the results and see if this makes them more tangible for everyone. And we'll start from the energy demand side. And so in solid EU, to achieve the respective climate targets, which was a prerequisite in the modeling that we performed, we can see that the final energy consumption decreases by 40% between 2020 and 2050. And behind this decrease, is mainly driven by the implementation of energy efficiency measures and electrification measures. And behind these gray bars that you can see in the charts now are the results that we obtained from our detailed sector modeling. And this is still a relatively high level of aggregation when it comes to the data that is actually behind all of this. But you can, if you take the sectoral perspective, we can basically describe what happens in the energy system between 2020 and 2050 by clustering everything that happens in each sector according to these 3 categories. So that is sort of the macroeconomic perspective, which includes population and gross value added development. And this is based on country and energy industry branch specific data, which shows that there, due to slight population and slight economic growth throughout the time period 2020 to 2050, we get a slight increase in the final energy consumption across all sectors. This includes only the mentioned macroeconomic effects. And it is most pronounced in the industry sector because population increase is relatively low, and there's a slight, on average, 1% per annum increase of the gross value added in the industry sector, leading to a larger increase compared to other sectors. Then there's the energy efficiency component. This includes a variety of efficiency measures in all three sectors, including very process-specific measures in the industry sector, building refurbishment, etc., in the household sector, which leads to a reduction in final energy consumption. And ultimately, the biggest chunk of the reduction results from the switch of energy carriers, which is mainly refers to, or mainly draws from the implementation, stems from the implementation of heat pumps, electrode boilers, etc., and more efficient process routes in the industry sector. So, and in the other sectors, obviously also the switch towards electric vehicle from fossil vehicles leads to a reduction in overall final energy consumption. Now, this is the sectoral perspective on final energy consumption development and the effect over that period of time. And there's the other very important perspective, which is the energy carrier perspective, and this is shown in the graph here now. So what actually happens with the energy carrier split over time. And you can see that in 2020, biomass and electricity roughly account for a third of the final energy consumption. And by 2050, 90% of that final energy consumption is electricity, hydrogen, and biomass. So these three energy carriers plus synthetic fuels that are required to reach deep emission reduction and which remain in hard to decarbonize areas in these three sectors, such as air travel, are the energy carriers of the future in our solid EU scenario. Now, this was in very brief terms the development of final energy consumption. Later on during our talk, we'll focus more on the models that are also behind final energy. But now let's switch the perspective towards the energy supply side and take a look at how actually energy procurement works, starting with hydrogen and then going towards electricity. And for this, I will introduce my colleague Stephan Kigle, who was responsible for the supply side modeling in eXtremOS.
Yeah, thank you, Andrej. So at first, we'll now have a look at the hydrogen production side and how our energy system model ESAR finally will meet hydrogen demand of the final energy consumption sectors. You just saw that there were the 800 terawatt hours of hydrogen demand in the final energy consumption. Additional to that, we also have a hydrogen demand from the industry feedstock, which we have to supply. So in total, we will have to supply roughly 1,000 terawatt hours of hydrogen. And in solid EU, we had some assumptions, which I will shine light on in a little more detail in a second, but I want to start with just one main result, and that is if, as in solid EU, hydrogen is produced exclusively in Europe, there is a need for a seasonal hydrogen storage. The storage is filled at times of high generation from wind and photovoltaics at low electrical loads. So let's have a look at this result in a little more detail on the next slide. Andrej, could you? Yeah, perfect. I already mentioned that there are some strong assumptions in this type of modeling. So first of all, we have the assumption that hydrogen demand must be met within Europe. So we do not have any import from hydrogen from outside Europe. This is quite strict, but as we are in eXtremOS, which is quite an extreme scenario, I think this assumption is valid, and it's really interesting to see what happens here. But what we do have enabled in our model is that hydrogen can be traded between countries. So not each country does have to meet its own hydrogen demand, but Europe, as in a solidary Europe, can work together to generate the hydrogen needed. And of course, we must have an opportunity to store hydrogen to see whether there are seasonal variances that we have to balance. So finally, when we have to meet now the 1,000 terawatt hours of final hydrogen demand from the end energy sectors, we see that in total we will install roughly 340 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity. On the right-hand side on the map, you can see the distribution and see that the main amounts of installed capacities is where the main demand comes from. So it's roughly France, Germany, and of course England. And additionally, we have quite high installed capacities in Denmark and also the Netherlands, which then supply part of its hydrogen to the neighboring countries. But as mentioned in the introductory sentence, I want now to have a look actually at the seasonal storage, because this is what is really interesting. So what we can see here is the fill level of a European hydrogen storage. And you can also see in the upper right-hand part, just to give you an idea of the development of how the capacity evolves over time. Now we are in the year 2050, where we meet our carbon reduction targets. And we can see that our maximum fill level is at 170 terawatt hours. So this is actually the capacity that would be needed to balance seasonal differences of the renewable energies production. So basically what we can see is that in the first quarter, the hydrogen storage is first emptied. This is due to our year starting in winter. And then we can see that the hydrogen storage is filled up during the second and third quarter, where there is a high generation of renewable electricity from wind and also solar power, while the demand of the final energy consumption sectors in electricity is low. This is due to the fact that in the summer times in Europe, it's quite hot everywhere. So heating demand is reduced. So we do not need that much electricity, and instead can produce hydrogen already that is then stored and used then again during the fourth quarter, during winter, where it is supplied then. So if we have one more click here, Andrej, yeah, maybe a little more, and we come to the final, one more click, to the final, how's it called? The final story that I want to give you is that the hydrogen storage is charged in the summer months and discharged in the winter months. But to produce that hydrogen, I already mentioned it, we need some electricity, which brings us actually to the gross electricity consumption. Because additional to the electricity consumption from the final end energy sectors, we also do have the electricity that needs to be produced for sector coupling technologies like hydrogen or power to heat also. So what we can see in our society-driven climate protection scenario is that the gross electricity consumption will double from 2020 to 2050, which brings us to this slide where we can see it. So we have in blue the final electricity consumption from the end energy sectors, which is roughly 2,000 terawatt hours in Europe more in 2050 than now. And additionally, there comes on top all the electricity needed to produce hydrogen, power to heat, or synthetic fuels. If we have a look at the regional distribution of this, we can see that in general, all of the countries just are doubling their gross electricity consumption, except, and this is what I tried to mention before when you remember the hydrogen production map, if you have a look at the North Sea regions, this is where the gross electricity consumption is over proportionally higher than in the other countries. And this is mainly due to the fact that these countries also install more electrolysis capacities to produce hydrogen that then can be transported to neighboring countries. So if we have a look at the next slide, we can see how this electricity actually is generated. And it's basically generated from volatile renewable energies. So what we can see if we optimize our energy system is that the installed capacities is around 10 times higher in 2050 than in 2030. Basically, a big or a large share of this increased capacity is actually coming from PV ground-mounted modules. So with these numbers, they're really hard to grasp. So I tried to break them down in annual numbers. So what would we actually have to build each year to reach these kind of final numbers in 2050? And the numbers here are quite impressive. So in Solid EU, we would have to build for solar 53 gigawatts per year. For wind onshore, it would be 23 gigawatts. And for wind offshore, it's the 13 gigawatts that we have to build annually. If we compare that to historical values, you can see how big or how ambitious actually this scenario is. We do have to more than double historic addition or historic maximum addition values to actually get to the 3,000 gigawatts installed in 2050. But how much energy is actually produced from that? So we have more or less 5.5 times the energy produced from all renewable energies compared to 2020. And now one would think, okay, well, that's all of it. But of course, we still do have some thermal power plants because there are peak load hours that we cannot cover by renewable energies production. So the backdrop in installed capacities for thermal power plants isn't that big as one would maybe expect. So in 2020, we have an installed overall capacity of roughly 500 gigawatts, which is then dropping to about 450 gigawatts. But what we can see is that the mix of thermal power plants, so what kind of technologies provide the energy produced, also changes. We have a phase out of nuclear and a phase out of coal, obviously. But then on the other hand, we have an increase of installed capacities of gas and combined cycle gas turbine power plants. So this basically is how our energy system looks in 2050. Now we have seen a lot of bar plots, but as we already said in the introduction, we did have a look in detail. So what we can do now is see how, for example, the wind installed capacities and produced energy from wind is regionally distributed. Therefore, I brought this map on the left-hand side where you can basically see how much electricity generation is done on a NUTS 3 level over the whole of Europe. You can see, for example, that in the North Sea regions on the coasts of France, Germany, the Netherlands, there's a lot of onshore wind installed and also electricity produced from that. So here you can see the regional differences. Also, you can see the high amount of electricity produced offshore in the North Sea region. But how much potential is left there is the amount of renewable energies that we install in Solid EU really coming to the edges of the rated potentials that we have. And I can say no. So there are some technologies in some countries where we quite kind of exploit all of the potential available, which would be, for example, for PV offsite in Germany. But as we can see on the right-hand side in the table, there's quite abundantly amount of more potential available to produce even more electricity. So what I want to give you as a summary is that in 2050, some countries will almost completely realize their VRS potential for individual technologies. However, the potential within the EU remains very large. And now, I don't know if you really have an idea of what that means. So that's what actually was our experience when we presented the results. So I'll hand it over to Andrej to maybe give you the possibility to look at it on a more regional level.
Great, thank you, Stephan. So as explained before, we'll take a look at the region of Bavaria, and in a, let's say, smaller spin-off project which we performed for a company in Bavaria. We took a look based on the results that we showed here on what this actually means in the target year for Bavaria, which is 2040 and not 2050. So today, or for this presentation, we'll look at photovoltaic installation in Bavaria. We also did this for all of, or most of the other figures that we showed during the presentation today. But to exemplify this, let's look at photovoltaic. And PV shows, probably expected from you by now, that we need approximately a six-fold increase in installed PV capacity in Bavaria to reach the target state in the solid EU scenario. So breaking this down into average annual installation figures that are required, this shows a similar picture as to what compared to what Stephan showed you on the previous slides. We're exceeding with the average annual expansion that would be required to reach the six-fold increase. We're exceeding the historical maximum by a noticeable amount. And as you know, this average annual expansion value does not consider that there is a ramp-up phase to the renewable installation in practice, meaning in order to, when you translate this into what will most likely happen in practice is, or what would have to happen in practice is that maximum installation and annual installation values would exceed even the average value that we see here as we come closer to the target year. Now, the numbers are sort of smaller, and perhaps for individual actors, the challenge is therefore more tangible in this case. But we thought we'd have to break this down even more in order to put the science into terms that is actually easy to communicate and that allows actors in Bavaria, this includes policymakers as well as industry players, to get a smooth and easy entry into the topic before being overwhelmed by details. So this is a communication aspect, and we broke it down for Bavaria as a whole, and some of the smaller districts in Bavaria. But eventually what the six-fold PV increase means that we calculated here from the solid EU scenario is that every week from now until the target year in Bavaria, we need an equivalent of 80 soccer fields of offsite PV and 1,000 rooftop PV installations until the target year in Bavaria. And as to the role that we also have in research, I would say this is obviously a very rudimentary message, but it's something that you can remember and can make science accessible for you. So we showed you a number of details, and we will show you more details throughout the presentation. But it's always important also to communicate and try to communicate the challenge so that actually each actor knows what they're facing in the future. Now, as to the learnings, and we are here to learn all together about our research projects, what we took away from the solid EU scenario was that deep emission reduction in Europe can work even if everyone deploys sector coupling measures. So even if everyone goes into intensive electrification in the industry and transport sector, demands hydrogen, demands synthetic fuels, the system still works. And this might seem trivial now if we just state it, but it was something we asked ourselves in the beginning, and we sort of confirmed this throughout our project. The second aspect was the European analysis creates extremely large numbers, which we weren't used to in the beginning, and which many people who focus on their national energy systems might not be used to. So it's always important to break the numbers down, maybe through a region, maybe to a regional level, maybe in comparison to historical figures, etc., in order to validate and communicate the results of such a relatively large scenario. Then we saw, as Stephan showed us, a very interesting result from my perspective, that if hydrogen is produced exclusively in Europe, as we have in our scenario, there's actually a demand for seasonal H2 storage. And ultimately, we can see that the gross electricity consumption, very similar to many other scenarios, increases dramatically, and that the installation of VUS is sort of the backbone of reaching climate neutrality and deep emission reduction in Europe. So this was the brief rundown of the solid EU scenario, and I hand it over to Annika again. Or Michael, I don't know.
Yeah, Michael, I think it would be great if you could summarize the questions, because we now have some questions, I think, in the F&A section.
There are some questions in the Q&A section. So I think some questions relate to hydrogen and the gas infrastructure, the results shown in the last on the last slides. And maybe to start, there's one question from Manuel Villavicencio, and he actually asks, with regards to the energy demand data by sector, how the data used in eXtremOS compares to that from EU reference scenarios from the JRC. So did you actually take into account other scenarios and other studies when setting up your scenarios and data?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. We compared our final energy consumption development to the few scenarios which try to achieve different levels of deep emission reduction throughout Europe. And I mean, the reference scenario itself is not comparable to solid EU, because as far as I know, the reference scenario does not reach climate targets, but we compared our scenario to other target scenarios. And I would say there's a relatively consistent picture across the different scenarios. So that is the Greenpeace Revolution scenario, for instance, also the European Commission 1.5 tax scenario, also TYNDP Global Ambition scenario, are sort of the comparable scenarios on a European level. And while we get approximately 7,900 terawatts of final energy consumption, the other scenarios are sometimes a little bit over it, but also sometimes a little bit under the final energy consumption. It just depends on the degree of electrification these scenarios, yeah, let's say, believe in to some extent, and whether or not the deployment of heat pumps in the industry and the building sector is intensive, or if other solutions are implemented in the scenarios.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for your answer. And then, yeah, a related question with regards to hydrogen demand data from Christian Perau. So could you explain the difference between hydrogen demand from industry and the hydrogen demand from feedstock? Is it that feedstock is used for chemical processes and the industry demand corresponds to the energetic demand? I'm not sure if you are the right person.
Yeah, I'll take that one as well. So basically, we have both energetic and feedstock use in the industry sector. We just didn't show both in one graph, but we have energetic use for the provision of process heat in the industry sector, where hydrogen burners are used to produce mainly high temperature process heat in hard to decarbonize industry sectors. And on the other hand, we also have hydrogen as a feedstock, for instance, during steel production or high value chemical production, methanol production, which is the other very robust source of hydrogen across scenarios. So these are basically the sections when you look at final energy consumption, where most studies, including eXtremOS, are fairly consistent that there will be a strong increase in hydrogen demand with respect to feedstock.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Then I think there is one question maybe for Stephan with regards to the storage requirements. So the IEA in their recent release indicates that in 2022, EU countries should increase storage levels for natural gas. And in your study, how did you factor in storage requirements of the various commodities? So one question from an anonymous participant, so maybe you could also add your name so that we can connect the question to your name and maybe also affiliation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, perfect. I'll try to answer that question. So basically gas storage commodities, we also had it integrated, but more on a really basic level. So we basically have a daily gas storage to kind of balance intraday variances, because that's what we see in the daily business. But then we didn't kind of really model a gas storage that would be filled or unfilled during the year. So this is mainly due to the fact that in the past it wasn't maybe that obvious that that would be needed. But if we, for example, had a look at the actual current policy going on in Russia and Europe, so maybe this is definitely a need where we could maybe make our modeling even better and have a more detailed look in the gas storage issue as well as in the hydrogen storage issue.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And then there is one question from Stuart Daniel James. Actually, I'm also interested in your answer here. So you showed that regarding the thermal power capacity in 2050, there is also some remaining gas power plants, and actually there's also some leftover lignite. So he asked, where does the leftover lignite originate from, in which country, for instance, and are the remaining gas power plants run on hydrogen in your model?
So regarding the gas power plants, they're not run on hydrogen, they run on synthetic gas. So basically it's synthetic methane that's either imported or produced in Europe itself. So we did not have the option in this project yet to really have also hydrogen-fired power plants, but that's definitely something we will integrate in the upcoming project TransHyDE. As eXtremOS builds the basis, we're going from here, and we also saw that as a problem in the backside, and are currently working on the integration of also hydrogen gas plants. And regarding to the lignite, which stays in the countries, I would have to look it up, or I can already now direct you to the web page of the project also, which will come in a little more detail in the second part. There's a graph which countries are still having lignite. However, even though they do still have capacities installed, basically the full load hours of these thermal power of these lignite plants are basically null. So it's just 2, 3, 4, sometimes 10 hours a year that they are running on full load. So basically none of these is used extensively in 2050.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. There's actually one question from Anne Geschke. I'm not sure on which slide this question relates to. How come Spain is not part of this? Doesn't Spain have really good prospects for green hydrogen production? So I'm not sure if Stephan can answer this question.
I might have an idea of to what the question relates. Maybe it's about the installed capacities of electrolyzers. So yeah, Spain's definitely having good solar resources, and Spain does have some exports of hydrogen into, for example, France and so on. But what's coming there is that that Spain itself does not have that high hydrogen demand. So and the transport to other European countries is quite far. So we do have some losses on the way there. which are basically which are a best guess from our side by now, because there are not that many hydrogen pipelines or transport possibilities yet. So we do not have actual numbers there. So it was a best guess of ours based on literature review. And our guess is that the losses are just too high, that the hydrogen would be actually transported to other regions in Europe. But that's also something we'll have a deeper look in the TransHyDE project.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. We were just discussing if we can also spend some more time on the remaining questions. So there are two more questions. So one is from Manuel Villavicencio again. So how much time does a model run take for a scenario as the solid EU, for example? So do you only optimize 2050 or the entire pathway? And what is actually, I think the time resolution that you use in the model?
Yeah, so our time resolution is 1 hour. So we're basically calculating the whole year. So it's 8,760 hours a year that we are calculating, and 1 year to model depends on a little bit on the year, but in 2050 takes about 1.6 days, 1.5 days. So roughly about 36 hours, something like that. And then to calculate the whole pathway from 2020 to 2050, it was a little bit more than a week, actually. Yes, there's seven model runs for 7 years. So yeah, it's quite time consuming, and if you have lots of scenarios to run through, take some time at the end of the project.
So you have to know what you're doing before starting a run. So okay, yeah, thank you very much. Then there is one more question from Rajon Bujan. Sorry for pronouncing the name wrongly. Is the cost of hydrogen production taken into account? Hydrogen is very expensive in 2022.
I'm not sure what is meant by if the cost of hydrogen production is taken into account. So we are basically really modeling the provision of electricity, which is then fed into electrolyzer, and with a certain conversion rate, which is in 2050 is about 70%. Is then converted into hydrogen, and this hydrogen is then given to the final end energy consumption sector. So basically what is done is that our model deploys the necessary capacities to produce this electricity at first, and then to convert the electricity into hydrogen via electrolysis. So we do have all the investment costs for wind, PV, all the other parts for electrolysis, and that basically gives us a price for hydrogen production. So there's all the costs factored in.
Maybe to answer this from the final energy consumption perspective as well, we will go into the models deeper later, but I can already say it is not a cost optimization which measures are taken on in each final energy consumption sector. So the hydrogen, the energy carrier price for hydrogen does not necessarily completely impact the degree to which hydrogen measures are deployed in the final energy consumption sectors. It is factored in through analysis of greenhouse gas mitigation costs and experiences we have with individual mitigation measures, but it's not a systemic cost optimization that lies behind the pathways in the final energy consumption sector.
Okay, thank you. I think we answered all of the questions we had so far. There's one more, some specific questions maybe we can even answer in the Q&A section. I think you can also write something down. Maybe the other one was for Stephan. I think we will now go further to stick with our time plan because we've now seen quite a lot of results, and you can imagine these are only part of the results we generated, and I think it could be quite interesting how do we actually communicate these results? I mean, Andrej gave already an example of breaking it down, but how can you visualize these results to bring it to the broader public? So not only the scientific community, but also other stakeholders. And I think, Timo, you did quite a lot of work on this in the eXtremOS project. So maybe give us some insights on how you went about the results dissemination. I think that could be quite interesting for.
Yes, thank you, Annika, for the short introduction. The main output of many projects of a similar scope as eXtremOS is a long final report of some 300 pages or more. But in eXtremOS, we wanted to make our research results more accessible and thus more impactful. And to achieve this, we decided to create an innovative website instead. And the first question we asked ourselves in the process was, who is our audience? We had identified a broad audience for our project results consisting of science, economy, policymakers, and also the interested public. And yeah, that was a big challenge. We then defined different requirements for this website. And these requirements were a high visibility and different levels of detail for the different audiences regarding their prior knowledge and illustrative key results and statements. And we wanted to provide an interactive exploration of the results and overall a user-friendly navigation through the project contents. So a good user experience. So embedding different formats was another challenge because we had short reports, we had publications in scientific journals, we had open data and interactive visualizations, and they all had to be combined on the website. So the next question was, how can we meet these requirements? At first, we had to select the content, and there we did an internal workshop, and then develop a concept, structuring the content and develop a story and translate this into a website structure. Next steps were the design, and there we did some studies on trends in web design, especially in science, and the technical implementation. And that was overall an iterative process. And we wanted to tell the project as a story with deep dive options. And we did it like this. We following these questions. What characterizes eXtremOS project? How does the European energy system look like today? Which future scenarios would be extreme? And how can these scenarios be modeled? And how do the scenarios affect the European energy system? And these questions were resulting in this website structure. So we had a main page with a general overview of the project content for all audiences. So there we have paid attention to simple language and short texts to keep it understandable, and for all audience regardless of their prior knowledge. And for more detailed information, we created subpages for the chapters, and we have divided these chapters into tabs, and at the end of these tabs, different formats have been linked to get a deeper insight. So there are short reports that you can download as PDF, there are publications, and there are also links to our open data website where you can download licensed data and use it in your own projects. So we can say that while the story is told from top to bottom, the level of detail increases from left to right. So at the end, we have 3 levels of detail for different audiences. But now enough about the theory. We want to have a look at the website, of course. So I will switch to the browser now. You can see this now. And the website, the domain is eXtremOS.ffe.de. And it starts with this landing page with this what if questions about the future related to our different scenarios. and then the user has the possibility to dive into the eXtremOS world. And after an introduction about the project, you can download the results presentation here, as well as our summary report. You can find out more about the research partners behind the project, and you have the possibility to contact the eXtremOS experts. So after this project introduction, the story begins with the status quo of the European energy system, illustrated by these 8 key figures, which are taken up further below. And then there is another web app that was developed in the scope of the project. And yeah, that app is the countryprofiles.ffe.de, and there you can compare different European energy data with interactive maps. So for example, the final energy consumption in the industry sector split up to energy carriers, and the underlying data you can get also as open data here. But back to the eXtremOS website, we go now to the next chapter, where you can discover our scenarios and the process we went through to develop them that Andrej told us before. And yeah, in the next section, you can find everything about our model landscape that will be topic later in this presentation, and that we used for calculating the scenarios. And maybe you're interested in our high, temporally and spatially high resolved final energy consumption in the industry sector. So now we go to this subpage of the sector model industry. There you can get in touch with Andrej if you have a question, or have a look at the structure of the model and also the model results. And at the end of the page, you can make a deep dive and go to further publications or open data, download it on our open data website here. So back to the eXtremOS website and back to the main page. Now we come to the last sections, the findings. And there you can have the opportunity to explore the results in our interactive ESA dashboard. That's a dashboard about our energy system model. Another web app. There you have a user guide how to use this web app. And there you can compare the different scenarios. For example, solid use scenario compared to QU for a certain region, Germany. Electricity as energy carrier, and now you can choose 2050, and yeah, you can explore the scenario results in interactive diagrams. So for a quick overview, you can also use this comparison at the very end of the eXtremOS website, and yeah, switch to all scenarios here and have a look at the key findings and also the key numbers here. Or, as in the other chapters above, go into more detail using the arrow on the right, have different tabs for the different scenarios here, ask Stephan a question, or have a look at the key messages or download our visualizations on the scenarios. So yeah, this is the end of this short demonstration, and we hope you enjoy discovering our results on the website. And overall, we can say that the effort to present the results in this way was worthwhile. So now back to you, Annika.
Thank you, Timo. I hope I shared the links also in the chat. I hope the audience will receive them. But yeah, for deeper insights, definitely check out the different tools which Timo just presented, so you will get hopefully all the information you need. We have some questions which are a bit more on the data and modeling part, but I will pick one or two out. Aaron Practigno, you ask an interesting question: how did we take into account the potential uncertainties due to carbon leakage out of the EU into account in our scenarios? I'm not sure. Andrej, maybe you or Stephan could say a word to this.
I can maybe start, and Stephan, you can add if you like. So the quick answer to this is basically that we excluded carbon leakage by assumption from our scenarios, but the idea behind this was that, and this is also why the project was called eXtremOS, that we tried to analyze extreme developments on the European energy system, and this means we excluded a number of pathways from further analysis that would just lead to, let's say, a reduction in final energy consumption and a reduction of emissions because of, for instance, carbon leakage, because this would reduce, let's say, the intensity of the effects that we see in the energy system. But nevertheless, we see, and also in the recent Agora study, we saw that carbon leakage is becoming a intensively discussed topic, and even the Agora study saw some or assumed some carbon leakage. And for further projects, I would say we still or have to rethink the scenario construction with respect to carbon leakage again. Yeah.
Annika,
Okay, you're
still
still muted.
Okay, sorry. I think I hope, Aaron, this answers your question. We have some more questions which we cannot answer live now because we don't have enough time, but I think my colleagues will try to answer them directly in the Q&A section. I guess we heard now a lot about results, and for all of us, it would be interesting, as we also see from the questions, to have a bit of a deeper look into the data and the modeling, which is really the basis for the generation of these results. So Patrick, maybe you can make a start with the databases and explain us a bit more what it is about and also what we can do with this data.
Well, yes, thank you, Annika, and hello from my side as well. I'm Patrick, also from the FFE. And yes, as you ask, I can give you some insights into our databases, and especially I will focus on the topic of application-oriented energy and emission balances for Europe, which we mainly used as a input data set. And well, I present it now because we consider it quite useful. Maybe some of you can use it. I will explain in a short bit how to use this, where to find it, and what's it for. But to start with, well, what actually is a application-oriented balance? In general, we see that there's some energy statistic data well available in many cases for different countries, for example. And what these application-oriented balances now do is they differentiate not only by, let's say, country or year, but also by application. I will show you some of the data later on, so then you can well, better understand what's it for. But in general, to give you a short overview, we have a set of statistical data for, say, final energy consumption. And this data is called an energy balance, where we can differentiate by country, by year, by energy source, by final energy sector. And what we now do is we process this data even further, and we get a more detailed set of data, where we then have final energy consumption, not only for year or country, energy source, and energy sector, but also per application within these different categories. And for some of the sectors, we also have a differentiation by branch. So that's basically the set of data we generated. And what's new about it is that we have this data for 30 European countries and for 4 different years from 2014 to 2017. And we have sets of data for final energy consumption as well as for energy-related CO2 emissions, which is also quite interesting to see. So that means we have a great set of data, which is input parameter for our models, basically for simulations. But you can also use it as to just analyze the status quo of the European energy sector in general. and that's why I'm going to show you some of the data later on. Just briefly, I give you an overview what we actually did to achieve this level of detail. We have various data sources which we use. To mention the most important one, that's the Eurostat energy balance, which is general and energy balance for European countries which are reporting to the Eurostat. And there we have final energy consumption, among other aspects. And what we did then is we did this application-oriented splits for 4 different sectors, which are the final energy sectors. So for private households, for transportation, for services, and for industry, we developed a application split, which is well, a share per application per energy source. So that shows us, let's say, what kind of percentage is used as space heating in the private household sectors for a certain energy carrier, for example. We used, well, for every aspect of these different sources, which you can find here. And then we also developed emission factors, which are specific for energy carriers and for countries based on the national inventory reports. And by combining these different aspects, first of all, the application splits with the energy balances from Eurostat, we achieved the application-oriented energy balances, and then combining this energy balance with the emissions factors, we actually achieved the emission balance. You will find much more detailed information on our website, which Timo just presented. Here's a special link, but you can also just find it on the website itself, where we actually explain more about the methodology. But I think, well, more important for you now is that we do have these 2 sets of data. And I mentioned before, we use them as input data for all our models, but also we provided this data at our open data portal, which is the link provided here. Timo mentioned it before as well. You can find all this data open source, and you can download this in various degrees of detail when you go to this link. So now you might ask, why should I go there? So I briefly show you what this data is all about, or what we have here. I mentioned before, we can well, analyze the status quo of the European energy sector in some detail with this data. First of all, I show you the final energy consumption. That's the year 2017. And it's the sum of all the 30 countries we analyzed. And you see here the shares of application in total. That's like the total number and the percentage for all the countries. And for example, you can now see that there is 28% of the final energy consumption in Europe is due to space heating, the application in a light orange color. Or for example, the biggest share is the mechanical energy, which is 40% of the total final energy consumption within these countries. And then what we can do with this data is we can actually have a deeper look and see which sectors are playing the most part in these applications. Take, for instance, mechanical energy. There you have 80% with a blue bar here, which is the transport sector. So that means that 80% of the energy consumed in the mechanical energy part is due to transportation. So that's basically all the transportation, cars, and so on. And then we have a third layer, which is our energy sources, and then we can access the same, well, different applications, and we can see that take for instance mechanical energy again, you have some 77% of the energy consumed for mechanical energy, which is due to oil. So that's basically, well, all the gasoline and so on, which is used for transportation. So that's the general overview for Europe, and we can do that not only for final energy consumption, but also for emissions. Here we have the same 3 layers, we have the same applications, but different shares, because, well, there's different energy carriers used, and therefore we have different shares. Let's see that there's, for example, the space heating share is a bit smaller now for emissions, whereas the mechanical energy part is a bit larger because we use more of the non-renewable fossil fuels, for example. And the special part about our emissions now is that we do have a fourth layer here, which is the distinction between direct emissions resulting from the consumption of energy, and the darker blue bar is emissions which are due to the energy source procurement. So that's like, well, how it's derived, and for electricity, for example, how the electricity is generated and the emissions which are accompany the generation of electricity. So that's an overview of Europe, and just shortly I'm going to show you what else you can do with the data. You can compare different countries and the development within these countries. So that's 8 different countries from Europe for the final energy consumption and for 2 different years. And that's differentiated by sectors. And what we can see here, for example, is that for instance, Germany, the UK, and Poland, we have an increase in final energy consumption within these 4 years. The increase in Poland is the biggest, and in the UK, it's a bit smaller. And when we now compare this in terms of emissions, here are the emissions now differentiated by energy source, just to show you that there's a lot of different, well, plots we can generate. But in general, the total emissions now you can see in Germany, for example, they are decreasing, as well as for the UK, they're even decreasing a bit more than for Germany. So that means there is more renewable energies now installed, even though the final energy consumption is going up, the emissions are going down. For Poland, for example, but also for Spain or other countries, we see still an increase in CO2 emissions within these years. So all this kind of, well, analysis you can do with this data. Now, what we also did is we developed country-specific profiles. That's 4 pages of overview regarding all this data we acquired for our project. So you find that on the website as well as on the specific link. And here we have an overview about a country. On the first page, it's basic data for energy consumption, CO2 emission, but also some key indicators, some political aspects as well. And the second page we generated with a special regard to the electricity sector. So all the main information about electricity, how to reduce emissions, where are the low-hanging fruits for these, and so on and so forth. What about the prices at the wholesale market, and so on. And then we have 2 slides for each country where you can find information about the final energy consumption and CO2 emissions. That's the data I just presented. And here we have it like already available for you to compare within these countries. On one slide with the energy sources and on one side with the applications. So have a look maybe just at this link if you're interested. I think it's a great opportunity if you just want to understand one country better, which you don't know about yet. You can just find these slides and have a look at them. If you however want to compare or get an overview about different countries, well, fastly, you can also go to the interactive online map for Europe. Timo already showed how it is connected to our eXtremOS website. And here you find all the information on a geographical map. So you can see, for example, now we are on the residential part of energy carriers. We see the final energy consumption by energy carriers for all the countries. And if we click on a country, we will find more detailed information within these boxes. And also there is a pop-up link for the country profiles I just mentioned, as well as for the open data portal where you can actually download all the data you need. So that's another well, opportunity for you to see, to analyze the data, and also to download the data if needed. So that's it briefly from my side about these application-oriented balances. I think the most important takeaway is, well, we validated all our data quite thoroughly. We used it as input, and we're quite confident that it's, well, very easy to use. And we actually have also some publications about the tendency of different balancing methods to show different results. So we did our homework and we compared national sources with these transnational sources of energy balancing methods. And we use now here Eurostat balance for giving the overall overview, but you can also find some national data on our investigations as well. And the last remark from my side will be that we will update our data also for the years where data is available. So that would be 2018 and 19 in the short run, and 2020 hopefully within the year. So there will be new data available for the most recent years as well very soon. So that's it from my side, and well, I'm not sure I saw something click up. Maybe there's some questions I might.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I think there is, or there are two questions from Emmanuel Villavicencio. So yeah, we will have some time to answer these two questions, and I think there have been lots of questions before that have already been answered in the Q&A. So please don't hesitate to ask further questions. And actually, Manuel wants to know if the applications to split energy balances to specific use are modulable or black boxes. And the second question, if you did include behavioral changes in the applications.
Yeah, thank you for the question. For the status quo, we actually did not like go somewhere from bottom up to different behavioral changes through different, let's say, process routes or something, but we took some other general data which is application based, and we matched this data with our final energy consumption. So there's no deeper analysis regarding behavior changes or regarding different aspects of these applications. I hope that's at least the answer to the second part of the question. The first part is we explain our methodology in detail in our short report where there's a link provided. So the sources where it comes from, that's not a black box, but we did not dive deeper into the data where that actually comes from or how that is derived. So I hope that answers the first part of the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think there's one more question that we will, I think, answer in the Q&A section, and so I propose to continue with your slides.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for summarizing the questions. I think now it's time for the last part of the puzzle. So we've talked about results, we've seen the data, and now to connect these two things, I mean, the data something has to happen with the data before actually results come out, and those are the model landscape Andrej mentioned in the beginning. So Michael, maybe for the final part of today's webinar, give us a bit deeper insights in how the models work and how the data actually are then translated into results.
Thank you, Annika. I'm happy to do that. So regarding the schedule, I think we need to speed up a little to stay in time. I'm going to show you how we model the final energy consumption per sector. And I'm trying to go to the next slide. All right. Yeah, you've seen this slide before. Andrej introduced it to you in the beginning. And now I'm going to talk about the left side here, about the sector models, where we modeled final energy consumption in the different sectors as an input to our energy system model ESA. You've already also seen a kind of similar slide to this one, the development of the final energy consumption in Europe per sector, but what you didn't see so far was what's behind it. So in eXtremOS, we identified various parameters and what we call descriptors, like parameters that define how the final energy consumption is developing over time, and those are quite varying in the level of detail. So, for instance, we use population development in almost each sector to develop the baseline development of the final energy consumption. And we also use different fuel substitution methods like direct electrification through heat pumps and others to map the development of the final energy consumption over time.
So I think what's kind of special about our sector models is that we can map the sectoral final energy consumption until a certain target here with a very high spatial resolution of NUTS 3 for the whole of Europe and a high temporal resolution of an hour. And it is still easily adaptable to different scenarios because we have a quite generic model structure that we can easily adapt using different input parameters and measures. What you see here on the right side is one result for solid EU or solid EU scenario, where you can see the weekly average load curve by heating and cooling applications per NUTS 3 region in Europe. And what you also see with the focus here on Munich and Naples, that of course you have a much higher load in the winter months in Munich compared to Naples. So behind this, we have, as I mentioned, a quite generic structure for modeling all the different sectors. So that's kind of what we call our backbone of our sector models. When I talk of sectors, I mean, in this case, industry, transport, households and services. And also we're often talking about the building sector as a combination of households and services. So this generic model structure consists basically of 3 pillars. The first one is what we call final consumption. That's the final energy consumption per country, so on a national level, per technology and per application. The second pillar is the regionalization model, where we break those national values apart into the different regions to get the regional dimension of the consumption. And in the third pillar, we use different load profiles to get our time-dependent resolution of the load. Yes, and when combining the results of those 3 pillars, we get the load curves per NUTS 3 level, per technology, per energy carrier, and per application. And then the next step is, of course, to model the development of the final energy consumption over time until a certain target here. And there, to do this, we use different measures and effects, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So now that we have our final energy consumption per country, per region, per hour, per energy carrier, and per application, we have the whole image of the status quo in the starting year. But if we want to have a look, how is it developing? How do these elements develop into 2030, 2040, or some other target year? How do we get there? Well, we identified different parameters and descriptors like measurement, energy efficiency measures. Sorry, that was one slide too far. All right, got it. It's a bit laggy, sorry for that. So I'll probably switch 2 slides. Yeah, we use different sector-specific measures and baseline developments like population development, direct electrification measures, energy efficiency measures to map this final energy consumption development over time. Before I'm going to talk about the other sectors, I'm going to shortly hand over to Andrej to give you a deep dive on the results for the industry sector.
Thank you, Michael. I will try to be brief. There's a lot of information already in this slide, but you already saw there's also a summary report, and soon, hopefully, my dissertation on the industry modeling will be published. So bear with me if I miss some of the details now during the presentation here. What you see here now is basically the deep dive into the industry sector 2020 to 2050. And as you already said, in the overarching sector results, the main pillars with respect to the energy carriers in 2050 are electricity, biomass, and hydrogen. Now, you will see also when we see the other sector results that there's a shift from biomass from the household and transport sector into the industry sector into hard to decarbonize areas. So let's go through the 5 building blocks of the measure implementation in the industry sector model called SMINT EU. And from left to right, we will just go through the let's say the up and downs of final energy consumption in the industry sector. We see an increase of final energy consumption across all energy carriers due to economic growth. The underlying data is country and industry branch specific in this case. The efficiency implementation of a number of efficiency measures leads to a reduction then in final energy consumption across all the different industrial processes and also the cross-sectional technologies in the industry sector, including lighting, compressed air, etc. Then we have a large and very important and complex aspect in the industry sector, which is the process innovation, which means there's some analysis going into this, looking at individual production processes in the industry sector and alternative and climate-friendly production routes, which can replace incumbent production routes. And this is also where the first hydrogen and energetic use of hydrogen, as well as feedstock use of hydrogen, comes into play in the industry sector on a European level. The fourth building block are direct electrification measures. These are mainly targeted at low temperature and medium temperature process heat across all the different industry sectors. So this means the installation of heat pumps and electrode boilers, for instance, during paper production, but also in the food and tobacco industry and other low temperature chemical processes. And ultimately, there's a fuel switch, a set of fuel switch measures included in the model, which target processes where we can, well, without or with minute technological changes to the incumbent technologies, substitute, for instance, solid biomass with coal in order to fire the process with a renewable energy carrier. And to understand what is behind sort of the gap between 2020 and 2050 are the annual changes and measure implementation effects that lead to this bigger picture. Now on the next slide, you can see a summary of the industry branches, processes, applications, and energy carriers, which are covered in detail in the industry sector, and I will not go through these in detail, but immediately go to the next slide where the picture is completed. So the sort of lowest level, aggregation level that we have in the industry model is the measure level, which affects the processes, which affects the industry branches, etc., and the applications. And as you can see here, these are again summarized, and we have the baseline economic development efficiency measures and fuel substitution that are already briefly explained. And one important and additional measure set, which is not visible or only slightly visible in final energy consumption, is our carbon capture technologies. And in the solid use scenario we spoke about today, carbon capture is also considered in the industry sector for capturing process emissions from cement and lime production. And this effect actually leads to the effect of negative emissions in the industry sector when we balance emissions, at least because these processes by 2050 in the target year are predominantly biomass powered, using sustainable biomass, leading to a carbon leading to negative emissions when we store these when we store the carbon that we captured there. Now this was very brief, but we have more sectors to cover, and I hand it back over to Michael.
Thanks, Andrej, for the interesting insights into the industry sector. Now here I'm going to show you a similar image representing the building sector. As I mentioned earlier, initially we modeled household services, transport, and industry. So building is kind of a combination of households and services sector. So on the left side, you can see the total final energy consumption in this sector of almost 6,000 terawatt hours in 2020. And on the right side, what is left after applying our developments and efficiency measures. So Initially, the population development is leading to a small increase in total final energy consumption, since the total population in Europe is about to grow a little until 2050. Next, in the next block, we see a decrease of final energy consumption of about 1,000 terawatt hours through different efficiency measures. And the largest share of the decrease of fossil fuels we can see through direct electrification measures. That's around 2,000 terawatt hours decrease, but at the same time also an increase in electricity consumption, of course, mainly due to heat pumps. So, sorry, which parameters and measures got us there? So what did we implement into our sector models to get to these results? First, in the final consumption pillar for the modeling of the national values, we used Patrick's energy balances per technology and application and combined them with country-specific ages of heating systems. To get the regional component, we used population and typical heating systems data per NUTS 3 region, and also integrated degree days to get the climatic response and the climatic relations depending on the region. To get the temporal resolution, we use typical load profiles of typical days regarding also public holidays and different coefficients of performance to get our load curves per NUTS 3 region. To map the development over time, we used here what you can see on the left side. We identified different parameters and descriptors like technology exchange rates, typical lifetimes of fossil heating systems, annual energy reduction rates, specific energy consumption per capita, and of course the population development. And we summarized those under those three measures, what I call here measures and developments. So of course the baseline development is again leading to an increase of final energy consumption through absolute increase of absolute population numbers in Europe. Second, the efficiency measure that's combining energetic refurbishment, insulation, and so on. It's leading to an increase of efficiency in space heating, which we implemented through a yearly reduction rate of final energy consumption by 1.1%. And third, we have the measure of the technological modernization, and that's resembling the exchange of fossil boilers at their respective end of life by heat pumps in the space heating and hot water application. Let's have a look at the transport sector. You can see a similar image here. In Europe, we have around 4,000 terawatt hours final energy consumption in 2020. That's almost 100% made up of fossil fuel share. And again, we see a slight increase through the population development until 2050 and a strong decrease of around 800 terawatt hours through different efficiency measures. And similar to the heat pump direct electrification of the building sector, we see a strong decrease of around 2,500 terawatt hours through direct electrification measures. And again, an increase of the electricity share of around 800 terawatt hours. In the transport sector, we also have a fourth measure that we call hydrogen fuel switch, where we implemented the exchange of combustion vehicles through fuel cell vehicles. So I will also give you a quick look at the parameters that we used for modeling the transport sector. First, to get the national values, we again use population data and typical transport performances, specific consumption per vehicles, and the absolute number of vehicles per country. And to break those apart into the different regions, we use population per NUTS 3 and recent number of vehicles per NUTS 3 in those regions. To get the temporal component into our load profile and our results, we use different load profiles that respect the typical vehicle consumptions by model, different availabilities of charging infrastructure, battery capacities, and also different plug-in behaviors. On the left side, you can again see the different descriptors that we identified to map the development of the consumption over time. And in the case of transport sector, those are replacement rates of the different technologies, future traffic performance, future specific consumption per road user, vehicle class, and technology, and again, the population development. So we summarized those again for the transport sector. I already talked enough about the baseline development of the population increase, but for the efficiency measures, we see more efficient vehicles. So we get a reduction in consumption through more efficient combustion engines. Then we have two technological replacement measures. One is replacement of combustion vehicles through BEVs, and the second, what I already talked about, the replacement of combustion vehicles through fuel cell vehicles. So what did we learn from modeling the final energy consumption per sector? Well, if models are newly set up, it is really worthwhile to formalize the calculation logics in advance and really to stick to them during the implementation. And when struggling during the modeling somewhere down the road, you can always go back and have a look at your initial calculations. So that was really worthwhile to us, that we initially really sat down and really thought about what we were going to do. Second, our modular structure, think about the pillars that I talked about, the final energy consumption, the regionalization, and the load profiles, really brings us many advantages in terms of the maintainability and the further development options. So if we're going to integrate new sectors and then we need new sector models, then we can just go back to our generic structure, exchange measures and parameters, and easily adapt our models. And what we also realized is that many inaccuracies only become apparent during the discussion of the results and in presentations like we're doing now, or papers and reports. So publishing on an ongoing basis really helps to ensure that errors can be identified early and also corrected at an early stage. So what's the future of our final energy consumption models? Well, in the follow-up project TransHyDE-Sys, we're going to use them and work with them and rebuild them somehow. So first, we're going to have a kind of general revision. What we want to implement is a stronger automated consideration of intersectoral relationships. Also, we want to focus more on country-specific transformation path, and also want to focus more on costs in detail. Also, we want to implement stronger links between political decisions and their respective effects on the sector measures. And we also, furthermore, want to implement new sector features. So, for instance, in the transport sector, we think about implementing modal shift or having a closer look at air traffic and shipping. And in the building sector, we could talk about electrification of further applications. So far, we only electrified space heating and the warm water applications because they have the biggest share in the energy consumption. Also, what we could think about was real consideration of hydrogen boilers. And in the industry sector, we're probably having a closer look at refineries. So there's more to come. And we're probably, well, maybe going to implement a new sector here. That's the sector of agriculture. And as I talked about earlier, it will be easy to adapt our generic model structure to integrate a new sector. And yeah, really looking forward to work on that and happy for any questions. But first, I'm going to hand over to Stephan.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we'll go on and have a little bit closer look into the ESER model. There were just some questions already popping up regarding whether it's an optimization problem, whether it's a simulation problem. So on the end energy side, I can say it's simulation problem. But when we come to the energy system model, we do have an optimization problem. So basically, this is why I have brought just a rough overview of what type of model actually our integrated simulation model for unit dispatch and expansion with the regionalization really is. So the model type is a linear optimization multi-energy system model, as we do not only model electricity. I'll come to that in a second. So our objective function is to basically minimize the total system costs. So in solid EU, this would be to really minimize the system costs of the European energy sector on the supply side. We do have by now a variable spatial resolution. So we can either model on up to grid nodes, or we can model Europe as a total, or we have different kind of steps in between that we can adapt depending on the problem or the project we're working on, or the problem we try to solve. Our temporal resolution, as already explained, is hourly. And now to the energy carriers. So we do have in total 7 distinct energy carriers that we are modeling here and that are interconnected with each other. So we do have electricity. We consider district heating, hydrogen, gaseous hydrocarbons. We call it like that as it's not only methane coming from the earth, but also in the later years, synthetic methane. We do have liquid hydrocarbons, which is oil, diesel, or other fuels. We then do have the biomass, and we also consider CO2 feedstock, which is then needed again in Europe, for example, to produce some of the synthetic fuels. We do have different constraints on our optimization problem. So in Solid EU, as mentioned in the beginning, we do have a GHG emissions cap. So we can limit the amount of emissions that are allowed to be emitted by the technologies. And of course, we do have more technical restrictions on individual technologies. What we can do with this type of model is market calculations and also grid calculations. What you now saw is basically market calculations. I'll come to the grid calculations also in a second. But just to give you a more detailed idea of how interconnected all the technologies, energy carriers, and so on are with each other, I brought you this slide. I won't go into detail as time is already quite advanced, but here it is basically shown the energy carriers and all the different components that interconnect the energy carriers with each other. And behind these components, there's even more detailed technologies. So every component you can see here can have more distinct technologies behind it with different efficiencies, different costs, and so on. So that's basically everything that's included in the model. So as I already mentioned now, we had in eXtremOS, we had a look on market calculations. So what does that mean? Basically, we calculated for the whole of Europe how the markets interact, but what we did not have in detail in the modeling is actually the infrastructure that's needed to transport any energy carrier from one region to another region. We just had an integration of stylized European distribution grids, if you want to call it like that. So that means that, for example, exchange rates between countries are limited for electricity, for hydrogen, just to represent how it's actually working in the European transmission grid, as we're not a totally integrated European energy market, but there's still more regional energy markets that for themselves build their prices and so on. So that's what's basically integrated or was integrated in eXtremOS. And what we now want to do when going to TransHyDE is really shift the focus onto modeling also the infrastructure, especially the electricity infrastructure and the hydrogen infrastructure, as the hydrogen infrastructure is of great importance, as we have seen, and especially to see how hydrogen can and will be traded throughout Europe, and what kind of new infrastructure is needed to really supply the amount of hydrogen we want to supply to the region we want to supply it to. So that's basically what our focus is going to in the next project. And yeah, we're quite excited what kind of answers we'll get out of this. And I hope we could bring you a little nearer our models. So now I'll hand it over to Annika to come. No, I have one slide left. just a tiny slide left here. And this is basically something which is a learning which would be a shame if I had missed it, because what's actually really important when modeling Europe is that you have 30 countries, that you have a look in detail on them, and you really need to validate and see whether your results are good. And when doing this just on a standard model, that's really complicated. So what helped a lot for us was to really develop a interactive ESER dashboard to really interactively be able to click through our results. And yeah, this is also what we published. It's available under eserblick.ffe.de, .ffe.de. And there you can also have a look into the final results, not only on a European level, but also on a country-based level. Yeah, so with that, I'll give it to Annika for the conclusion. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thanks, Stephan. And I think we're in time, even 10 minutes, time for some more questions. I will actually check out the Q&A section. Stephan asked if we can share this material. I think we will talk to the IAEE to see if they might share the slides. For us, it's no problem. In case you need them right away, just send us an email. Yeah, you see our name, so you will easily find us on the website. Just send us an email if you need them quickly. We will definitely share also the slides with you if you like. And of course, and this is also our final slide, we have all these information available on the respective websites, which we also shared in the Q&A section. So maybe have a deeper look there, but please feel free also to contact us. We are happy to have more detailed discussions with you. Actually, we want to thank you at this point also that there were so many questions today and many very detailed questions. So I think there's much more we could discuss. So maybe just email us, the respective colleague of mine who did the data, the modeling parts, and then maybe from there we can start working together on some more aspects. So thank you for staying here until almost 6 o'clock, at least European time. And I hope it was interesting. I hope we brought about the message that European system analysis is important, that it is quite complex, but that you can handle it if you have the right modeling landscape, you have the good databases, and then you can also generate, of course, a lot of complex results, but you can also break them down and visualize them in the easy way. So we let you through the whole process, which we went through when doing this project and also other projects. And as Stephan said, we will work a lot on this in the coming up project TransHyDE. So happy to discuss with you and get some insights, especially also on the infrastructure part. And I think with this, I will leave it for now. There's one more question I can answer in the Q&A section directly. So Michael, you have something to add? Otherwise, from our FFE side, big thank you. And yeah, we are looking forward to seeing some of you on a conference or maybe a one-on-one discussion.
Maybe just two more sentences. So also from my side, thank you very much for the very interesting presentations, and also thank you very much to the audience for the interesting questions and the discussion that we had in the past 2 hours. So thank you very much.
Great. We would, if you would provide us with the slides, we'll be happy to post them to the IAEE website. We'll also be uploading this entire video and placing it online for everyone to be able to see. We'd like to thank both FFE and the German affiliate of the IAEE for an outstanding webinar. If you're not a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.